What's up, everybody? This is Grant, that Cause Artist. Welcome to another episode of the Disruptors for Good podcast. Today, I speak with Garik Himebaugh, the founder of Eco-Stylist, on going from being a piece worker to being an MBA student to discovering social entrepreneurship and creating a sustainable fashion marketplace for men, which is great. When we think about sustainable fashion or eco fashion, I think it's really women centric, and I think it has a much bigger audience towards women. But I think, hey, men want to look good and feel good and do good as well. So I love the idea of coming at it from a men's perspective and kind of building a product for us, right, so to speak. So appreciate Garik for that. But Eco-Stylist is an online marketplace for eco-conscious and ethically made men's clothing. It was founded to answer one simple question: can sustainable be dapper? Of course it can. And so Eco-Stylist finds you clothes that look good and look good as the values that they sort of represent. I think what Garrett says is that who wants to wear clothes made from child labor and toxic chemicals? He doesn't, and I don't, and I don't think nobody wants to. So they really showcase and research heavily and really present brands on the marketplace that fit a ton of different criteria. That they have partnered with the Remake Sustainable Brand Criteria. And so that framework goes really in depth to, I mean, certify is a bad word. It's just really measuring a brand's environmental and social impact. And that's really what they want to focus on, is to curate brands that really represent what Eco-Stylist represents, what Remake represents, and what the world of sustainable fashion and eco-conscious clothing should represent. We talk about a lot of things where not necessarily misinformation, but just sort of, brands that can do a lot more, right? They sort of label themselves as being sustainable and eco-conscious, but they're doing the bare minimum. And I think that what's great about Eco-Stylist is that it really curates and represents the companies that have a full ecosystem that they have created around sustainable fashion and sort of eco-conscious fashion and impact fashion, if you will. So I think that's why I appreciate the platform that he's built, because I know how hard it is to really, research these companies and make sure that they are being transparent. And I think one thing he touches on is that, like, it's really great to see brands go take their impact journey, right? Maybe they start as a certain impact bottle that is the bare minimum, right? But he loves to see these brands mature into, really creating that ecosystem of impact at their entire brand and throughout the supply chain to its workers, where, ethics are really profound throughout the entire company, not just one area. So that's what I really appreciate about Garik and what he's built and sort of what his team's doing and the partnerships that he's creating. It's really interesting, and I think it's much needed in the space. We try to do some of that at Cause Artists, really research and deliver companies and brands that from all over the world, from all backgrounds and all sectors. But he specifically is focusing on the fashion market for men, which is super valuable. So hope you enjoy the conversation. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's staying healthy, and have a great day. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye. So usually how I like to start these conversations is about the individual's journey to kind of get to where they are, and specifically why they start, their brands and their companies, and coming from the social impact space, social entrepreneur space. Usually it's a really interesting journey to get to that point and to discover sort of the industry itself. So talk a little bit about just your journey, man, and starting Eco-Stylist.
I think I've become a big believer in the idea that, like, we don't actually know where our journey is going to take us necessarily.
Yeah.
So for me, we kind of have an idea of where we want to go, but it just doesn't. I think being open to the fact that that's going to evolve a lot is important. For me, it kind of started when I studied conflict analysis and resolution in undergrad, and so that was essentially peace studies. And at the end of our program, we studied abroad in Liberia. This was in 2010. We were doing peace building work, because I think at that point it was like 10 years after their civil war had ended. And so they were still doing a lot of like rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of like from all of that experience, we worked like only with local organizations. Like we would like visit, US Aid and like talk to people from the UN while we were there, but we only worked with local NGOs that were Liberian. And so anyway, so like from that, I knew that I wanted to do something with the social impact, after
Hmm.
that. But then is like, figuring out how to make that happen. So I ended up getting a job in like the financial sector, which was not what I wanted to do. And I thought I would just do it for a little while and kind of see, ended up doing that too long, and felt kind of like, yeah, I felt pretty stuck. And that was when I kind of like had like a quarter life crisis when I was 25. And I said, everything's failing, like this is not what I wanted to do. And so I quit that job and I just started trying things. So I got a job. I knew I liked problem solving. So I got a job at a software company. And I was doing like light coding for them in SQL,
Hmm.
and that was really fun for me. But like already, like I was starting to think much faster. So after less than a year, I quit that because I was like, this isn't what I wanted. I got into an MBA program at the University of Iowa. And my vision for that was I was starting to, so I had this like side passion for entrepreneurship that I had been like I just read tons of books and
Hmm.
consumed tons of material and went to conferences, and I started to learn about social entrepreneurship. So for me, I saw the MBA as like a safe and a potential way to like do that. It's like I combine
Sure.
business with my P studies, and then
Yeah, it's great. Smart.
but at the same time, like I knew you don't need an MBA for entrepreneurship, So I was like, but for me, it was like a safety net. Like I was like, I could still get a product manager job, with this sort of background. And so yeah, so that's kind of how I got there. And then I was like, so then I did a startup weekend while I was in. So my plan was to maybe start something while I was doing my MBA. Like I was like, maybe I'll start a business. I'll see how it goes.
Right. Right.
Um, and so, like, right in the beginning of that, I went to a startup weekend, which is like where you try to build a startup in 3 days. And it's like a Techstars program. And the theme was fashion. And so
Mm,
that was where things started to come together for me because I love fashion, but I never thought about incorporating it into a business of any kind. So that got me starting in that. And then it didn't really have a social theme of any kind. So my plan there was kind of like, okay, well, I'll just like build like a really successful startup, sell it, and then I'll start doing social good things. Cause like I was like, that's what other people do, right? Like that's
right.
what you
Right.
see people do when you look at like successful people. So I thought that's what I was going to do. And then I met the founder of an ethical shoe company in Boston, and his story really inspired me. So this was Adelante Shoe Company, and
Hmm.
they really ensure living wages for their workers, and like they pay like it's significantly more than the average pay. Like I think the average pay in Guatemala for a shoemaker is like 10.50 or something, and they pay like 22.50. And so it's like, yeah, so they're like, so it just really got me inspired because I was like, I didn't know that brands did this. Like I heard of like Tom's, and I knew that like brands like Warby Parker were starting to do this like buy one give one thing,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
this was totally different. This was like really thinking about the people making
Right.
the stuff, and that was where like the kind of light bulb went out for me. And I was like, okay, well, what if I want like a whole wardrobe with brands like this?
Right.
And I was like, that's when I started doing the research, and I was like, holy crap, this is really hard. Like I don't, it's like I gotta find brands I trust. I gotta like, and then I was like, this is what I should be doing. So I pivoted my startup. Like I already had an MVP, and I was like out there testing it with people. Like I had tested
Mm.
it with like 100 or 200 users, and I completely changed it. Like I was like, no, I was like, it needs to now be the case where like all of the brands are ethical and sustainable, and so that you just like from a customer's perspective, you're just like buying clothes you like,
Yep.
but they're having like this great impact. And so yeah, so that was kind of where Eco-Stylist started.
It's awesome. No, I think it's like exactly what I tried to create with cause artists was that understand like it's sort of a like a lifestyle, right? So like yeah, a pair of socks is great, right? But like why not your entire everything you wear has like an impact behind it or a story behind it. Like that's where the real power comes in is really your whole lifestyle, looking at what you're buying and who you're buying it from and really be conscious of that, right? Because you're buying anyway, right? Like you're no matter you're still gonna buy these shoes or these sunglasses or this sweater or these pants. But I think now the platforms like yours and others out there now there's resources to kind of go to because I think a lot of it before was like yeah I'd love to do that but how do I do that right who can I trust to do that for me essentially right essentially you're kind of like curating this for
Mm-hmm.
them and so I think now that the sector has matured a lot, and I would see these platforms coming out, then I think people can now create that lifestyle where everything they do can really have an impact behind it. And when you were first talking to him, did he introduce you to other brands? Like was he technically like the first brand on the site, or did you go to him and say, hey, what are the other companies like yours, right? Just in different sectors. Did he relay any kind of message to you about how to get started in discovering the brands?
That's a good question. He didn't really, he more just talked about his brand because like
Mm-hmm.
he introduced me to Adelante Shoe Company, and I learned all about them. And then like I went and had a beer with him and learned more, like just asked tons of questions. And so
Hmm.
really I was just learning about their brand and what they do, and just kind of like diving deeper. And then that inspired me to look for other brands. And at the time there wasn't a platform that I would have used.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's why I was like, I got to build this because there was nothing. And there were I think at that time, because that was like 2 years ago, there were other platforms that were starting to like not curate, but like what's the word I'm looking for, like aggregate. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
there were platforms like Done Good and stuff that were starting to
Yep.
aggregate men's clothes, but it just wasn't. It's not a way that I enjoyed shopping, and it wasn't a way that I saw customers
Hmm.
shopping
Hmm.
personally. No, I mean I think, and I'm that's not to say like I think their tool is fantastic. It's like
Yeah.
so, but it's like, but if I'm trying to solve the specific problem of men's shopping, which I was and which I am, like I just don't think men shop that way, And I was like,
Yep.
so my goal was like, I was like, okay, because I know, I did like tons of customer discovery, and I know how tedious they can find shopping in one case, and like in other cases they may just like not have a lot of confidence around like what to buy or what looks good with like this and what looks good with that.
All right.
And so I wanted to be like laser focused on that. And I was like, I think, I was like, if I can just like solve that problem and provide a platform that's really focused on the needs of like just this one customer. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we landed on that.
What you said before was super important, is that like you had to have a way to not like certify, these brands, but make sure that they were quality enough, or lived up to your standards, but also like, consumer standards and things like that. So like, how did you go through that process and saying like, because it's hard to be that like person that you're like, oh, you're good enough to be on the platform, but you're not good enough to be on the platform, right? It's like this weird sort of gatekeeper thing where it's like I would feel like we were doing it right. It would be tough for me to like say no, you can't be on here, right? But so how does that work in the analyzing part of the companies?
Yeah, it was tougher in the beginning, I think, because we developed our own criteria,
Hmm.
and we were constantly kind of questioning, that we landed in the right spot with our
Right.
criteria. And so yeah, definitely trying to, and then we obviously had our own concerns, but what ultimately came to mind was like from more customer discovery and from starting to like as we started to interact with customers, we started to learn that trust was a huge issue in this
Hmm.
space.
Hmm.
So the criteria really didn't become about like what we thought anymore. It really became about like what customers were asking for. And then kind of, and also just through networking, just kind of actually through a chance meeting as well, I met the founder of Remake, which is a nonprofit that does great work for advocacy in the fashion space, especially for people. So I met Aisha, the founder, at a conference called Remote in LA, and it was kind of her idea to have us partner. And I took that back and I thought about it, and I was like, okay, if I adopted their criteria,
Mm.
does this make sense for us? And it did, because of like several reasons. One is our values are perfectly aligned with theirs. Like what they were doing was what we wanted to do, but their criteria was better developed. It was more transparent.
Yeah.
And I saw it solving that problem that we were having with trust. So it's like, yeah, it's like unfortunately we have to say like, we have to create some kind of line where it's like, these brands are sustainable, these are not, but that allows us to build trust with consumers, and it helps them to be able to shop by their values. And so we really settled on their criteria because it's in line with like exactly our vision. And we saw a lot of problems. Like there's still problems. Like we saw like
Yeah.
Google not being a good resource for this, because, you type in like top 10 sustainable brands, and you get a lot of brands that we kind of intuitively knew like weren't doing as much as some of the brands that we work with,
Sure.
like you would see brands like Everlane in like every single top 10 list.
Right.
And it's not to say like we're not, like, again, it's not to say they're not doing anything. It's just, but it is to say that like, for customers that want to shop ethically, like we can definitely recommend to them brands that are doing a lot more for people.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's kind of the bar that we wanted to set.
Yeah, no, I think there's different levels of what impact is, right? There could be, just because you're a B Corp, right? That's not the end all be all. No, it shouldn't be, at least, right? I mean,
Definitely.
they've built a trust factor for sure, I think, but I think you're right that other brands have more innovative impact models, right? And I think that they have raised the bar a little bit to where, and not. And I don't think we want to get into a space where it's like this brand is doing more impact or whatever. And it's like the bar keeps being raised and raised. And then it's like never, then it's like impossible to reach up to anything, right? But I do think that there are companies out there that take the ecosystem in its entirely like seriously, rather than just one part of the business. And I think that's what I look for, right? Personally, as just a consumer. Like I think I'm in the weeds so much where, just because you are B Corp doesn't mean that I'm going to buy from you just because of that reason, right? There's tons of amazing companies out there that aren't B Corps, right? That aren't certified and have these stamp of approvals. That doesn't necessarily mean one is better than the other. But yeah, I do love the idea of having a trusted partner that you worked with, because the one thing that I've learned, like with cause artists, is that sometimes you can't do everything yourself. And some people have already done the thing that you wanted to do that you can incorporate into what you're building.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and if we could talk about the B Corps thing for a second, because I'm really glad you said that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I completely agree with you on that note, and that is, but it's often not something where I find people agreeing with me very often, unfortunately. And it's and I don't mean to, it's not like the reason I say it is because like I think and no, B Corps is I think it's, first of all, it's great. It's a great movement.
I
Like
agree. Totally. Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Like,
yeah, and
nothing's perfect, just like with anything, right?
yeah, and they've built a lot of trust, but we are starting to push back with some of our content on that a little bit. Not to say that it's not good, but just to say that, like, hey, just because a brand is a B Corp doesn't mean you should just be like, hey, I'm gonna buy from you. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to fashion, because we have that like fashion specific lens where we're really thinking about like the garment workers and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so we've written some articles, and just the interesting thing though is like I think I feel a lot more resistance because I think people trust the B Corp certification so strongly. And again, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but what I am trying to say is that like if we're looking at fashion brands, it doesn't tell you everything you need to know, And so some perfect examples is like we just put out an article that like Allbirds didn't pass our
Mm-hmm.
criteria. We have another, and I don't want, I wanted stories of progress too. Like we had another example, like we had United by Blue was a B Corp that
Mm-hmm.
that like failed our criteria when we got started, and then they sense like, but they've been doing so much, and this is what we love to see. We love to see progress from brands. So like since that time, they've unveiled like transparency, they've unveiled like factory certifications, and they share that information, and so they now pass our criteria. And that's, but I mean, it's just an example to say though that like before and after they passed our criteria, they were a B Corp, and so it's like I just think that, yeah, I think I agree with you. I just think we might want to push a little bit further and just look a little more closely than just for that certification.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, I know some of the stuff that they look at and certify, but like, for example, like, Tom's up, look, Tom's is sort of, it's going to be, I think it's a tremendous case study, right? In everything, the journey that they have gone through, because I think they went from very humble beginnings, right, to like scaling at like an unheard of rate, right? Taking like venture capital, right? Like doing all these things that no other social impact brand has done. They were kind of the first to go down this road, and then kind of looking at the impact model and be like, well, maybe 1 for 1 is not very sustainable, right? And maybe there's other things we can do for impact. And then they became a B Corp, right? And then, but then they failed to make their debt payments, and then they got bought by a bank. So it's like, as labeled and approving of like a B Corp, like I feel like having good books should be an important thing, right? And like if you have like too much debt and then like you can't pay it and then you get bought by like a bank, then maybe you should not be a B Corp, right? Like I wonder if there's a way you can take it back. That would be a weird thing, but like I don't think it's just, we should just focus on like the way things are made or how much they pay their employees, but also like, is it actually a good business? And like, are you doing stuff from like a sustainability standpoint from the business perspective to where like you have the ability to make an impact? Now it's like they're kind of in this weird state, and I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but I guess like it's just, there's so many things that could go into it that it doesn't seem like that's a criteria too, is having like a good balance sheet.
No, that's really interesting, and that's a good, it's a good point, and it is hard, I guess, in some sense, to be a social enterprise because you got to do so many things. Like you got to,
Exactly, yeah, it's
but I
tough.
think yeah, I think it's shooting for like this shared vision of what business could be, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's what matters. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. It's like you need to make it, and it is kind of in a way one of the it is actually like the first level of criteria that we have when we look at a brand, in a sense, not in the exact sense of like what your balance sheets, but in the sense of we look at their product. Do we think that this is adding value from a fashion perspective, from our customers' perspective? Because at the end of the day, like you could make something super sustainably and super ethically, but maybe nobody needs it. Maybe it's ugly, and
Right.
I don't mean to like, but or maybe it's like it doesn't, and that actually matters with clothing because like it's got to be the full picture. Like if people don't love wearing it, then like you're not going to be able to make that impact that you want to make,
Yeah.
and so that is actually the first level of like criteria that we look at for any brand before we then run them through remakes. It's just like, does this add value? Because we want to put out the image that like dressing sustainably isn't a sacrifice. Like you can look great like with awesome clothes that you love, and then they're also made in this great way.
I want to talk a little bit about the business model, because if that's at the end of the day, like we need that to work, right? It looks like is it a completely affiliate model, correct?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, do you want to explain maybe how that works, the affiliate model works, and I'll go into some other questions that I have about like what I think you guys could do. Like I think you guys are in a really good spot.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, so the affiliate model essentially is, yeah, is where you use links and like that pass a customer through. So it's like if a customer, we don't actually have like a shopping cart, and
Yeah.
we don't
You
actually,
don't do the checkout part.
yeah, we don't have inventory. And
Hmm.
so yeah, so it's like when somebody clicks on that item to buy it, it would take them to like Outerknow's website to make the
Hmm.
purchase. And then we would make a percentage of that as affiliate commission. So yeah, so that's kind of the model. And it's obviously there's pros and cons, but obviously like one of the pros is from a scaling perspective, it's pretty easy. You don't have to worry about inventory, right? And stuff
Yeah,
like
that's great.
that. Obviously it's lower margins than like if you had inventory. So
Mhm.
you've got to reach a wide audience. So yeah, so it's just kind of a different way of going about it.
Did you look at other models, or out the gate you knew that that's kind of the model you wanted to do?
No, we've been pivoting and adjusting like from the beginning and trying to figure that out. Like, and I mean, in the very beginning, we had no business model because it was just like it was just a matter of like trying to, yeah, just try, like we were just like, let's just solve the customer's problem first,
Right.
and then we're gonna figure out like how to monetize it. And we've tried a lot of different things, and I've done some, just to give some examples, like I've done some
Sure.
personal styling work, and I still do some of it, but we're really low key about it because like it's not something we can scale, so it's like if I spend a bunch of my time doing that, right, like it's not really, it's going to kind of take away to some extent from our larger vision of what we want to
Hmm.
accomplish. So yeah, that's a good example of where we've tagged on like some other business models that, and then been like, you know what, probably not, like not for like long term gonna work.
What's you mentioned sort of the longer term goals and visions. Do you have a clear idea of sort of what that is right now? Do you want to go into to a little bit of that? Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe what that sort of North Star is?
I can, yeah, yeah. So a little bit of like what we plan to do is, so we kind of started Eco-Stylist with because I mentioned like we really thought about our customers' problems and the way that they shop, and we started Eco-Stylist with an automated personal stylist. So like the website used to
Mm,
just be where you come to the website and there was a chat bot, and you would like engage the chatbot, and it would basically like help you shop. It was like your personal stylist, but like automated.
gotcha.
And we ultimately, like, the product that we built just wasn't good enough, and so when we eventually realized that the data supported it, and so we took it down and we started to give customers other things they wanted, like a brands list,
Hmm. Hmm.
like a curated shop. We focused on like shoppable blog articles that really help with like specific questions, like ethical brands for people that are, shorter than 5'8", or like
Hmm.
taller than 6'1", or whatever, like these different
Right.
kind of
Right.
questions that people have. And then, but like what we want to move back to though is, but we're definitely going to move back to more customization is one thing. So like we're going to go back because we want to solve that problem that we initially, which we're not really quite doing right now, because like you're still shopping even if it's like a curated shop and it's not a lot of browsing. So we're definitely going to be bringing back a more technical feature that makes shopping really easy for you as a customer. Building on that, we're probably going to expand into other markets. So probably eventually women's. I want to avoid that
Mm,
until we're really doing like a solid job
yeah.
of our core customer.
Hmm.
People have tried to like pivot us into that like a lot of times, and we're like, it's like, yeah, but there's other people doing that,
Yeah.
and
100%. Yeah.
we want to, and I know that doesn't mean, it's not a reason not to do it, but we want to really solve this problem for our customers. And then,
Yeah. Go ahead. Go
well,
ahead.
no, and then just keep expanding. Like honestly, there's more. If there's markets that aren't being served, we're going to move into those. Because I think because people care about sustainability like all over the world, and
Yeah.
you're seeing like emerging like in China, people are starting to become interested in this, in terms of clothing, right?
Yep.
And other markets, and so it's like and obviously there's a lot of energy in Europe, but like whatever markets we can add value in, we'll be thinking about that as well.
So I like the idea of like an ethical like Stitch Fix. Like that's
Yeah,
what I would see. Like that would be an awesome model for you guys. But like that, I know that costs a lot of money and it's all kind of thing. But like what they do is really good. They're more of a tech company than like a fashion company, right? The problem I think with them is that all their products are just fast fashion, really. Essentially, it's like so we don't necessarily need them. It's like we already have like all these clothes in where people already know about like all that stuff, and it's just like they have such great tech. Like it would be phenomenal if all they did was like ethical brands, because I think there's enough now out there where there is enough like inventory from all these social impact brands where you could have like an ethical sort of like Stitch Fix where like you said, you go on their site, you put in your size large or medium, like what's your waist size, all this stuff to where every month, like Eco-Stylist could just send a guy like me like a box like that, right? Like that would be incredible. Like I would love that, something like that.
Yeah.
How hard is that to build?
No, that is a great idea, and it is something that we've considered and are considering. But I would say I would want to do it in the right ways. So like some of the questions like for example, I know because like you mentioned like sustainable, which I think is really great that you're trying to like addressing the whole lifestyle, because you're right. Like people that it's not just like your whole wardrobe, but people that care about sustainable clothing probably also care about other things. Like they maybe they also like use reusable coffee mugs or water bottles, or
100%,
they're probably like doing all kinds of other habits as well, and lifestyle
100%.
decisions. So like yeah, so the one thing intention that I've had is like I also would want to make sure that we're not like pushing clothes like too much clothes on people that they don't actually need. But
Right,
I think there's
right.
reasonable ways to adjust that. Whether it's you move to a
Quarterly
quarter.
instead of monthly, yeah.
Exactly. Or
Yeah.
you take into account like customers' needs in the beginning, maybe like through an input survey. But yeah, I just would want to make sure that if we move that way, that it would be still in line with like a sustainable lifestyle.
I know the criteria it's sort of not yours per se, but like when brands do come through the criteria sort of phase, right? Could you talk a little bit about what like the criteria is? I guess what are they filling out? Like what questions are they answering? Like things like that.
Definitely. So the criteria we use is one where we're mostly trying to be able to do all the research ourselves. That's the
Mhm.
vision for the criteria, because which I really agree with. It's I don't think we're quite there today, but we're pushing for it. And so that's like, and that vision is that we can do a research. So the ultimate vision is we can do all the research from a brand's website, and
Gotcha.
a customer could do the exact same thing.
Gotcha.
So like so there's no like mystery, like a customer could simply like if they and hardly anybody's going to want to do this, but we want them to be able to, like, if somebody, just that's a lot of work, but if somebody wants
Yeah.
to be like, hey, did Patagonia like really, I mean, okay, they're probably not going to ask that, did like Vustra really pass your criteria, because they know Patagonia is, but like, but maybe a brand they've never heard of, they're gonna be like, does Vustra really pass? Let me find out. And they'll like be able to double do our research, and that's what we want. And because we also think that's the level of transparency that's needed in the world. So yeah, so that's how our criteria works. We're still at a stage, especially with smaller brands, where like we will ask them for more information, and then we'll encourage them to put that on their website, because I don't, and the main reason for that is because I understand that if you're a brand that's 3 months old, like
Of course.
maybe everything's not on your website yet, and so we'll kind of like help them out a little bit, but also encouraging them like that we want this information on their website, but if it's a bigger brand that's been around for a while, we don't usually do that, because it just because for obvious reasons it doesn't contribute to the vision of what we're going for. Like if Patagonia, for example, was like hiding all their information, like we wouldn't bother reaching out to them, because it's like they've been around for 50 years, like
Yeah.
it's like yeah. So but yeah. Oh, and to get into the criteria though, yeah, so it's there's like 5 main sections of it. And so it's like transparency is one, where we're really looking at like, are they transparent about their factories and where the clothes are made.
Hmm.
And then there's like maker well-being, where it's like, what are like, do brands, because a lot of brands will reinvest in their workers and or the communities where those workers
Right.
live.
Right.
Wages is a big one. Like they get a lot of points on the criteria if they pay livable wages, because that's super important. I mean, it's the most obvious way to empower people. It's like
Yeah.
when we're talking about empowering workers, it's like they don't need necessarily like our help. Like they just need fair wages. It's like
Right.
just pay them like something reasonable.
Yeah.
It's like it's not too much to ask. So yeah, so there's those sections. There's like there's raw materials, where we look at the sustainable raw materials that a brand is using.
Hmm.
And there's also the sustainability of the manufacturing. So that dives into like, do they recycle their wastewater? Do they have like a plan to save water, to reduce CO2? Are they circular? So there's kind of all these opportunities for a brand to get points. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm a big one thing that you said a little earlier that's been sticking with me is that like I see the potential in like Allbirds to really kind of be sort of like a transformative brand in a lot of different ways. What was it about them that didn't pass yet, and do you see them eventually passing the criteria for what you guys are building?
Definitely. I definitely think that they could. And I think, and it potentially, depending on like what their supply chain looks like, it could be relatively easy for them.
Right.
So, because the main reason they failed, it was that lack of transparency. So in the transparency section, we weren't able to give them any points, because there was no transparency on their website. And then when you moved into like the manufacturing or the maker well-being side and all of that, they
Mm-hmm.
also weren't able to get any points because there was no information on any of those things as well. And those
Gotcha.
those don't exactly go together. Like you could not have transparency and you could
Right.
share what you're doing for maker well-being, like those two, but in their case, like there wasn't information on any of those things, and so we weren't able to pass them for that reason. And it's definitely an easy fix I mean, for them in a sense. I mean, they could at least be getting all the, because they scored 31 points, 50 is passing. Like if they just had the transparency, like then they would automatically get like with like 15 more points or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then if they fully did the transparency, and then depending on what certifications they have, they could get more points, right? And so really we'd be taking a closer look then for those other sections at their supply chain. So yeah, and I hope that they do. I mean, the point of the article was definitely not to be like, it was really just to give a different lens at which to look at what's a sustainable brand. It
Right.
definitely was not to bash them in any way. Like we know a lot of I've tried Allbirds, like we know a lot of people love them, and we threw a section in the article where we were like, if you love this brand, like reach out to them and just
Yeah.
ask them to put this on their website. And we hope that they do, because they're seen as a leader, I think, in a lot of ways. Like even their whole initiative on like measuring their CO2 is a good
Mhm.
example of leadership. Like that's a
Yeah.
leadership position, and so we hope that they come out with like the manufacturing leadership as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's a huge deal, man. The manufacturing side obviously is the game changer that the entire industry needs to look at, right? To look at that lens as the monumental sort of shift that the entire sector needs to happen. I want to kind of nerd out a little bit here, since we know like a lot of brands. Like what are some of your favorites, right? Like what through all your research and just through your purchasing habits, like what are some of the brands that you really like, you really love what they're doing, and they make a great product.
Yeah, there's so many, but I'll just start naming them. I really loved. There's a lot. I really like Outer Known a lot. I
Hmm.
think they're doing so many things well, and I think, and it's probably not too much of a secret. I think a lot of people recognize that. Like I said, I love to see that progress. So
Yep.
that's what I mentioned. So when I talked about United by Blue earlier, like
Yep.
I'm really glad to see the progress that they're making. Like that, I think that's one of the. It's so important because even like even if a brand passed the criteria, if they're just being like stagnant, that's kind of a concern, because like most of these brands, it's really better when you see them making progress over time. So a good example of that would be like Taylor Stitch would be a good example of a brand where
Hmm.
they passed our criteria, but they didn't necessarily score the highest.
Yep.
But then if you looked at them like over the course of like the last, I don't know, like 2-3 years that I've been watching them, they've done so many more things. Like they've replicated Patagonia's worn wear program essentially.
Yep.
They've now switched like all of their cotton over to organic cotton. That's a great example where it's like, okay, maybe they weren't perfect.
Right.
But they're good enough for sure, and they're making that progress, and it's like that's really encouraging to see. Other brands so brands that I love. I mean, obviously, Adelanti Shoe Company was like the
Yeah.
brand got me into it, so I love their shoes are awesome. Nisolo is another one where I feel
Yeah.
like I'm watching them make steady progress, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I'd love to see that progress. Yeah, it's just there's so many.
Yeah, that's it. Those are good, man. All those are
This one, like the shirt I'm wearing is from a brand called Vustra.
okay.
That's pretty new in the space, and they're another one where like I'm even in the short. It's not even that long. We've been working with them for a little while, maybe 2 years. They're a pretty new brand, but we've been working with them since almost the beginning, and they've also like again progress. Like we're seeing like they're becoming. Like I think they had a combination of ethical factory certifications in the beginning, and then they've just kind of shifted over to fair trade, and
Hmm. Hmm.
and and they're starting to use like linen instead of just organic cotton. And yeah, and so they just make men's shirts. It's a pretty narrow focus that they
It's
have.
great. No, it's good to start that way. Have one product do that great, and then that's a lot of successful business models, right? Like Allbirds, for example, they just started with shoes, right, and now they have socks and they have underwear, right? Build the brand first. I think it's really a smart move by them, because there's not many people making dress shirts sort of like that in the sort of ethical space. I mean, Taylor Stitch, you just mentioned that they're kind of one, but again, there's not a ton of competition there. So I think it's smart by them to just focus on that.
Exactly. And then I'll just I should throw in there a few small brands out here, because like give a few small
Hell
brands
yeah,
a shout
man.
out.
Hell yeah.
So Tack and Stone is a really cool one that I met. When I was in LA, I shot a video, and I interviewed their founder. And they're one of our brands. The really cool thing about them is just the amount of focus they've had since the beginning. Like they were
Mhm.
really serious about like their fabrics, and and pretty much all their clothes are made in either LA or Portugal. And so they've just been kind of doing they kind of like came into it with like trying to do everything right from the beginning.
Hmm.
Obviously they're thinking about like they're thinking about next, like how do we incorporate circularity into our brand, but yeah, so they just have like men's staple pieces and really great stuff there. And then some of our newer brands, like Voice Threads is a brand that we just brought on. I met the founder of that when I was in Phoenix. So it's a sock brand that is like made in USA, recycled materials. They're made in North Carolina, and they're really all about like supporting the nonprofits, but in a different way than like Conscious Step. So
Hmm.
like the way that they do it is they make these like really colorful mismatched socks that are designed to start conversations about
Okay.
nonprofits.
Interesting.
Yeah, because the idea being like, if I'm like, hey Grant, like those are awesome socks, like what does that mean? And then you tell me the story, and then maybe I think of that nonprofit in the future, or maybe when I like see that nonprofit in my email, I would want to give to them
Yep.
because I like, so
Hmm.
so they're all about like supporting nonprofits, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think we'll sort of end on. We kind of touched on it a little bit before, but I'd like to end on the future a little bit. I know it's a tough question now because just the times we live in is much different than really any other time that in our lifetime at least. So it's hard to project a little bit. The question would be like, what do you want the platform to be, right? Like in let's say 5 years down the line, 3 to 5 years down the line. What are some of the progress you want to see, you make and the platform make, just like we're seeing, we want progress from the brands to keep happening. What's the progress from your point of view that you want to see happen within Eco-Stylist?
There's a lot of things that we want for the future, but I think the big ones are that we want to like leveraging our partnership with Remake. We want to help define what it means to be a sustainable brand. So we will really be pushing that further. And we recognize that even though like you can download our criteria, you can already find the criteria on our website. You could already
Yep.
do the research yourself. We recognize that it's still a bit intimidating. So we're going to be coming out with things not in the next 1 year, not even 5 years. We're going to start making that like way simpler.
Okay.
And so we're really gonna, yeah, because we're working with Remake there. We just really want to push this out there because we think it's really important to define what it means to be a sustainable brand today. And then kind of like to what you talked on earlier, like we also want to we want shopping sustainably to be even, not just to be like possible, but to be even easier and ideally like even better than
Hmm.
shopping normally. So I know
Yeah.
that's probably sounds pretty ambitious given that like there's billions of dollars being spent on like other shopping solutions out
Yeah,
there that are
for
not
sure.
sustainable. But if we can do that, we're going to figure out how to do it. And so that's definitely something that I want for the future. And in 5 years. And I think I've many other times that I've been interviewed or been talking about Eco-Stylist, I've like said that I think in 10 years we'll put ourselves out of business because we really see the whole future. We see like we want the whole future to be like, we want, our whole reason we started was we want all clothing shopping to be sustainable. And if
Yep.
that goal is achieved, like who needs Eco-Stylist or any
100%.
other service? But to be honest with you, like I don't know if I actually, I'm like realizing I don't know if I actually believe that anymore. Like that, I mean that we'll put ourselves out of business in a sense because
Because
I think
you'll just pivot, right? You'll progress in whatever manner you need to,
exactly.
right?
I think we'll be able to continue to help people like
Yeah, for sure.
live even more sustainable lives in line with their values and in the way that they want. And so, yeah, we won't be the same, but I think we'll still be helping people, achieve a more sustainable lifestyle.
Yeah, amazing, man. Well, I appreciate your work you do. I know it's sort of difficult to go from idea and passion to actually building the company and building the platform and the structure. And so I appreciate the grind and the effort because it's needed, man. And I appreciate you taking the time as well. I know it's a busy time for everybody, and our days are packed with phone calls and all kind of discussions. So I appreciate you carving out some time for us. And best of luck this year, and definitely best of luck next year. Hopefully that'll be a really a growth year for you.